world already runs on biology, but I would like to see a future where it runs on biotechnology, where it's actually these ideas and these principles that are way more scalable, way more sustainable to really produce abundantly for every human on the planet.
Hey, Karl, how's it going?
What's going on, Erum? It's Synbiobeta week as we record this.
Yeah, Synbiobeta week. We'll have been schmoozing with some of the greatest minds in synthetic biology. We'll give a full debrief of what we've learned and who we met and spill any Synbio tea if we can next week. But today, we're going to have a great episode for you. We have Elliot Hershberg. We'll talk more about that and talk about what's going on in the world of biotech today. You and I are starting to readjust after being away for some time and just curious what's going on and what you've been seeing out there.
I mean, look, here we are. This is the Grow Everything podcast. We try to shed light on what's happening in the biotech industry and how it's affecting people's lives. I'm excited to come back with a report from Synbiobeta, as you said. But in the meantime, you mentioned that there was something on gut health that was on Netflix. So I'm super interested in that. And I want to also mention that PFAS was mentioned on a very mainstream podcast, which we didn't even put in these notes. But let's talk about your gut health and Netflix. What was that about?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Netflix knows me. These algorithms know you. So I was suggested this documentary called Hack Your Health, The Secrets of Your Gut. I was just thrilled that there was this documentary about the microbiome on Netflix. It was so well done. The idea is that they had 4 people that had different issues when it came to their gut health. There was a woman she's actually a world-renowned chef, but had eating disorder that affected her microbiome. They had Kobayashi-san. He's a competitive eater. He's the one that won the Nathan's Hot Dog Coney Island contest many years in a row. He's like a super skinny Japanese guy. He also practiced a lot when it comes to competitive eating. So how does that affect his gut microbiome? So I'm not going to give it away, but I just learned so much. We talk to all these microbiome companies and what they're doing, and some of it's very technical, but taking a step back and talking about the science and how the microbiome influences not only our digestion, but how we think and how we feel, and how does this mass of different microbes that don't share the same DNA as us, but they play a role and how they work together, right? It's not just one microbe that just is doing everything. There's thousands of microbes that work together to help us function. And so it's very, very, very well made, beautiful graphics, definitely worth watching.
I remember you had said there was a show on Disney Plus. I saw the trailer for it yesterday. It's a Korean show that centers on the rise of clean meat.
Yeah, blood-free.
Blood-free. So that show is on Disney Plus, and the trailer is on YouTube. I watched it yesterday. It looks like a very exciting drama. Seems like a little bit out of the ordinary for Disney Plus, but I think it's something for us to also take a look at. And if you've seen Blood-Free, please let us know. We're very curious about it. I love this microbiome stuff. I think there's an increasing interest in skin microbiome as well, not just the microbiome in your gut. And I think we're going to see a lot of products that are developed specifically to be microbiome friendly.
Yes, microbiome on our skin, microbiomes everywhere. It's covering our land, it's in the air, it's everywhere, and you can't escape it, but it's wonderful. The microbiome is really interesting because it was the first life forms that are on Earth. I was really interested to learn, and I learned this from Henry actually, that the mitochondria was a bacteria that lived on its own, and then another cell, I don't know what it's called, engulfed that mitochondria, and it's a process called endosymbiosis, where then that bacteria ends up becoming a part of a bigger system and becomes an organelle. So there's the mitochondria that got absorbed and then gave way to all of this multicellular animal organisms. It happened again with plants, where chloroplast was absorbed and then gave way to all of plant life. But then something happened recently, and I don't know why now people are talking about it, but I've seen it in the news about a nitrogen-fixing bacteria that got absorbed by an algae. So what does that mean? And what type of algae life forms would be proliferating because of this new experience, this new endosymbiotic relationship?
Yeah, it's fascinating because mitochondria are known as being the energy producers of cells. And there's actually measures of how many mitochondria you have. And That's supposed to be a measure of longevity and athletic ability. Plants use chloroplasts to fix sunlight and turn it into fuel. Algae, which I'm super fascinated by, now have this ability to fix nitrogen. That is wild. That is just wild. So I really want to dig into that because I want to know what this means. To me, it's just another example of how fascinating and how biology continues to evolve.
Yeah. And let's stay tuned. I mean, my thought was like, okay, if this is a big thing, is anybody making organelles to put into different microbes to make different things happen? Like creating a factory within a factory? I mean,
I know I've said it on this podcast. The thing that I find fascinating about algae is algae has basically 3 genomes. They've got mitochondria, they have their own genome, and then they also have chloroplasts. So I think of algae as being a perfect protein production factory where you could do very complicated engineering, but maybe algae as a production system is too complicated to do that kind of engineering. But I do think conceptually that that's possible. Having this new life form appear is just super, super interesting.
Yep. We'll keep our finger on the pulse of this news, see what happens, see how people respond to it and what does it mean. I'm excited to learn more. And then there's always amazing things going on in terms of the biotech AI world. I know we'll talk more about this space with our guest today. We were having a conversation earlier about Time Magazine's biotech ChatGPT moment.
So Time Magazine had an article by Eric Schmidt, ex-CEO of Google. And Eric has been a huge supporter of the biotech industry and has a fund that funds focused research organizations. Cultivating is one of them. And he had an article in Time Magazine that was really talking about biotech's ChatGPT moment happening very soon. It hasn't happened. Clearly, ChatGPT and AI has been in the news a lot because of how the impact that it's going to have on our lives and the fact that we have the ability to work with AI right now. And we have just barely started to do that. But now Schmidt is suggesting that we're about to live through a ChatGPT moment with biotech. And I agree with that. I think we're very close to that.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see what that looks like. I haven't read the article, but just curious if he sees that being driven by AI and technology or some type of new physical technology or organism that can unlock a lot of scientific advancement or biological advancement. It would be great to talk to him. It would be great to have him on the pod, actually.
Absolutely.
Eric Schmidt, are you there? Come on the pod.
We got to get him on. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's always great content being put out by people. And one of the people who puts out really good content is Elliot Hershberg of the fund Not Boring. I think you and I have been fans of Elliot and his column or his, I guess, regular articles. It's called The Century of Biology. And he writes very in-depth articles about different companies and trends that he sees happening in the biotech industry. These are usually very high level, very deep, and it's no surprise because Elliot is working on his PhD at Stanford. I'm really excited to have this interview with Elliot Hershberg of Not Boring and Stanford University.
Elliot Hershberg, it's so great to see you again because we were at an event that you hosted in New York City, and we're so happy to have you on the podcast.
Likewise. Thank you for having me. Always good to be with friends.
Yeah, absolutely. You are a kindred spirit. There's so much we need to talk to because you're in science communications, you're working with early stage companies. So let's get into it. I think where we really want to start first is, who is Elliot Hershberg? What is of your background? Can you tell us a little about that and what you're working on today?
Of course. Yeah. I have sort of a winding background that ties together some of the things that I've been working on. I started off my life as a writer. I wanted to study English in college and was writing poetry, was actually publishing poems before I was ever publishing science. And fundamentally, I realized that I needed to get a job. So I was studying science, considering pre-med initially, taking biology courses, and just totally fell in love with biology. So took a pretty hard pivot and ended up studying the life sciences for a good amount of time. And then when I was in the life sciences, went down a deeper rabbit hole and realized how much biology was starting to intersect with the engineering disciplines and computer science. Went further and studied computer science. And that's really the strange blend of background experiences that are a huge part of my life now. So I work as a computational biologist, and I also write about this space in a newsletter called The Century of Biology. And then third pillar of my current activities is that I'm an investor at Not Boring Capital, where I cover these spaces as an investor. It's all the same job, but 3 different jobs, where I'm just somebody who's way too obsessed with biotech and computational biology, and I'm coming at it from 3 different angles of science, writing, and investing.
That's awesome. I mean, as a fellow writer who had to find a way to pay the bills, I totally get where you're coming from. I'm going to go out of order in the questions because you mentioned the newsletter, The Century of Biology, which we're huge fans of. Can you describe what that newsletter is? And did that come before you joined Not Boring or after?
So that came before. It was really a passion project during COVID. I was working as a software engineer on a genomics project and really missed the interaction and impetus from working in a group to have a typical lab meeting and be covering new papers and having a research seminar to attend. So I was working remotely and didn't have that engagement with the scientific community. Realized that there just wasn't any news source where I was reading about the types of scientific results that I was interested in. So there's thousands of preprints published every year. It's exponentially growing. And I thought, well, it'd be kind of interesting to just write about the preprints that I'm reading and share notes with other people. And so it was really a passion project, a side project. It just took off way more than I would have expected. So I wanted 100 subscribers in total. That was my goal for the next year or so. And I hit that in the first 24 hours. And clearly there were people that were excited about reading about these advances in life sciences. And then, like I said, my background is in writing. I really use writing as a tool to think about the world and understand things that are happening around me. So it's mushroomed into a variety of different topics where now I still cover new scientific results coming out of labs with a real focus on bioarchive preprints. These are papers that are being posted online before they ever hit a peer-reviewed journal. So sometimes you'll be hearing about new results in genomics before they end up in the New York Times or Time Magazine a year and a half later. So you can sort of be a genomics hipster with me. And then I also cover private companies and even extend a little bit into the philosophy of biotech. Why is it that we're actually doing all of these things in the first place?
I didn't realize that you had a background in writing. I feel like I should probably leave so you and Karl can talk. You got probably so much to talk about. But and I'll continue asking questions. So I'm actually curious. You were reading these preprints during COVID. You're inspired to write this newsletter. What was the first newsletter that you wrote? What was it about? What was the science behind that preprint?
So it was nanopore sequencing, which is this incredible new type of DNA sequencing where instead of chopping up DNA and reading out small fragments using imaging, which is how modern high-throughput sequencing instruments like the Lumina work, you actually flow a strand of DNA through a small protein pore that's held on a surface, and you get an electrical current of what the stretch of DNA is. So you read out A, T, C, G, G, G through this electrical current that's as the DNA sequence is going through a pore. And what's absolutely absurd is that this technology has a software API where in real time on the instrument, you can say, you know what, this isn't the sequence that I'm interested in sequencing. So I'm going to physically eject it from the pore on the device and start looking for new sequences. This is called adaptive sampling. So if you think about that, that's utterly absurd. It's a beautiful example of how connected the life sciences and computer science and software have become. At the physical device level for a biotech instrument, it's software controlled to the level of a nanopore. I was writing about this bioinformatics paper from a lab that I've followed for many years that had developed a new algorithm using that software API. And I think my enthusiasm just came across where I really try and write about things simply and they can be understood by a software engineer that's excited about this DNA sequencing instrument and also just very enthusiastically. I'm a very selfish writer. I only write about things that I'm really interested in. I was putting my enthusiasm on the page for this technology, and I think that was a good starting point.
Yeah, I have to read that. And a nanopore sequencer is like a handheld device. Is that right?
There's a range of different sizes of nanopore. So one is literally called a dongle, where it's the MinION sequencer that you can plug into a laptop and sequence DNA in the field. You can be in sub-Saharan Africa, wherever you are in the world, sequencing new samples, which is incredible. There are also really big instruments that actually a group that I rotated with at Stanford used to break the world record for the fastest clinical sequencing of a genome. So there's a range of nanopore devices, not sponsored by them, just very excited about the tech and think it's a super interesting evolution.
And Elliot, you mentioned that you also write about the philosophy of what we're doing in the life sciences. Can you maybe unpack that?
Sure. So I'll give an example of a field that I think does have a coherent philosophy right now that isn't biology. In AI, people truly believe that they're building a God-level intelligence that is the most important thing they could possibly be working on. You can feel it when you talk with researchers from these groups. They really believe that. Whether or not you think that's true, there's a fundamentally coherent philosophical backing for why they're writing the very specific way that they're tuning an optimizer or changing a model architecture. There's this connection to a societal level change. I think that's missing in biotech. I think we often talk about curing your grandma's cancer or some impact on patients. There's this huge emphasis on the patient narrative in biopharma, and that's amazing. I really believe in reducing suffering of living things, and so that's the fantastic goal. I've worked in biomedical research for a number of years, started off working on cancer vaccines. But I think that there's a broader narrative that's missing, which is that our newfound ability to read, write, and edit DNA has potentially cosmic consequences. So this is a newfound ability to engineer life that has huge ramifications for our own bodies, for our planet, and then literally expanding outwards into the universe. I think that getting young people and getting people that are already working in the field to really grapple with the existential weight of biology in the biotech revolution is this important missing piece that I don't feel like we're comfortable talking about. I think it's a cultural difference in biotech labs versus AI labs, for example.
Yeah, that is a big thing. I feel like it's a philosophy that's shared with just a small group of people. I do sense it when, for example, you had that event, you co-hosted it with John Cumbers of Synbiobeta, and we talked to Andrew Hessel, all those other people. But I think through your newsletter, which of course we'll put in the show notes, and hopefully through our podcast, we can start talking about that more.
That's totally accurate. Andrew's amazing. A lot of my life philosophy is inspired by Drew Endy at Stanford, who's been really thoughtful about the planetary scale impact of biology and synthetic biology. So I'm trying to add a piece to that over time and help synthesize those ideas and even just explain some of those ideas to a broader audience, for sure.
Yeah, that's the one bucket of Elliot Hershberg is the writer, the scientist, but then you're also a biotech partner at Not Boring. I'm curious how you got to Not Boring. What was that evolution like of your career?
It was the internet. We live in a really crazy time. So I was working away on my PhD thesis at Stanford, was actively writing. I did a VC fellowship at APC, which is a really established venture firm in San Francisco and now Texas that has $6 billion of assets under management and is a large group that's done some really exciting deals in biotech. And so I learned a lot about venture through that fellowship. And I thought, this is super exciting. I'd love to keep doing this. And was thinking potentially about doing small, what are called syndicated investments, where there's a software platform in Silicon Valley called AngelList, where you can group together people and put checks into the deals that are happening through your network. And I thought, I wonder if I could spearhead some of these syndicated investments through my writing. Turned out that I was completely reverse engineering Packy McCormick's model, who's the founder of Not Boring, where he's built one of the most widely read tech newsletters on the internet. Also had the idea to start sharing some of his angel investments on AngelList. And with the size of his audience and the excitement from his network, he realized that there was an entire opportunity for not only a syndicated set of deals, but a venture fund. So it's a team of two on the investment team. It's literally just Packy and myself. The goal of working together is at that time, after I'd left APC, Packy was looking for a more technical member to join the investing team and explore areas that he didn't have as much of a deep background in. I was looking to continue. And so it was this perfect blend, and we've really enjoyed working together since. So a ton of serendipity. I did not think starting out writing about bioarchive preprints in a very enthusiastic fashion would lead to a very critical part of my career and hopefully what I'm continuing to do over time. The internet is an interesting place. I think there's a huge amount of opportunity for people to try new models in a variety of markets.
What are some examples of the biotech investments that Not Boring has made?
One example is Atomic AI, which is a spin out from Stanford University, a really talented scientific founder named Raphael Townsend, who, if you're familiar with AlphaFold, there's been huge advances in protein structure prediction that have really made their way widely across biology. RNA has been a little bit more of an afterthought. It's been a harder problem. There's been less data. And the assumption was that with a smaller amount of data, there really wasn't going to be an opportunity for progress. Raphael proved that that wasn't the case and had a really landmark advance in RNA structure prediction while he was at Stanford, and realized that that was potentially an entirely new platform technology for making all kinds of RNA drugs, especially molecules that are targeting RNA molecules, which is a really interesting emerging area of therapeutics. So as they were spinning out, we were really excited to join that syndicate along with really great investors. And we've actually since written a really exhaustive deep dive on Atomic AI that people could find at Not Boring.
Wow.
And so that's generally the flavor of company that we're looking for. We're looking for really brilliant technical founders with new ideas in labs and helping them bring that into the world and start really ambitious companies.
Yeah, that's incredible. I'm actually curious, since you mentioned Atomic AI, there's a lot of big tech companies getting into the protein prediction space. Even Salesforce is in on this. I think ByteDance is also getting into it. What do you think about that? First, why are they getting into this space? How do you think Atomic is different? I mean, I'm sure there's lots of very specific differences, but in terms of our audience, can you share a little bit about your thoughts on that part of the world?
Totally. I think that's a really interesting observation. So when I think about tailwinds in the sector, when I was in 2014 tinkering with installing machine learning libraries and obsessing over a set of academic papers, it was really still not clear that machine learning in biology had legs and was going to be an important part of the future. It was still bioinformatics as a discipline in computational biology. It was really a way of just analyzing measurements coming off of instruments, turning that into something that biologists could understand. But now if you zoom forward, clearly these sectors are completely colliding and intersecting. So Google DeepMind, which is where the initial AlphaFold advance happened, is clearly a large corporate technology lab. As you mentioned, ByteDance, even TikTok was hiring computational biologists. Companies are spinning out of Meta and Salesforce. So I think the lesson there is clearly computation is going to be an important part of biology moving forward. We're clearly at this intersection where there are parts of biology that are best tackled by technologists and AI scientists in a totally new way. I think that's true for protein science and for a range of areas. And it's funny to reflect. One of the academics that I really, really admired is a computational biologist named Aviv Regev, who was a faculty scientist at the Broad Institute in Cambridge and was publishing these beautiful papers that I was reading. Now, this computational biologist is the head of R&D at Genentech. So you're seeing computation make its way all the way up to the top of some of the largest and most important biopharma organizations. And you're seeing these tech organizations flood in and become obsessed with problems like protein structure prediction. If you told that to me a decade ago, I would have thought, no way, right? So it's like this really exciting moment where it's accelerating.
It's super interesting because biology is super complicated. We still don't really understand all the processes that are going on in a cell at any given time. We can maybe isolate them spatially or temporally, but it's so complicated that I would think it makes sense that the big IT data companies, chip companies get interested in it, because what we end up learning from biology is going to definitely impact the way that they design chips for the future. And then the other part of it is biology potentially generates so much more data than anything else. So again, it's going to be this huge data problem. That data has to be stored, has to be mined. We have to understand how to generate insights from it. What do you think that future looks like in, 5-10 years?
There are a ton of interesting threads here. If you think about it from a couple directions, fundamentally, what's really interesting about this is that if you think of the importance of math in physics, this is this beautiful quote from Demis Hassabis at Isomorphic Labs, who's now the CEO of Google DeepMind, a large AI organization, and the CEO of Isomorphic Labs, which is a leading AI-first bio company. One of the ways that he framed this is that if math was the fundamental description language for physics, it may well be the case that machine learning and AI is the right description language for biology. So what does that mean? Why would that be the case? Fundamentally, biology, cells, organisms, tissues, are what are called complex adaptive systems. And that sounds like jargon, but it just means that biology are these complicated, non-linear systems that you can't describe with simple closed form equations like you can in physics. There's no Newtonian mechanics of a cell. In a different paradigm where as our ability to make measurements scales exponentially, we have this huge growth of data and the ability to learn these representations from that data of things that we can't write down in mathematical equations. But I think there's another side to this, and that's the importance of those modeling tools for biology. But you also mentioned this is going to impact chip design and the way that computer science fundamentally works, where biology is also literally digital. People get mad at the analogy that biology is like a computer. Biology is not a computer. That's totally fair. You can harp on that. But it is literally digital. So there is a quaternary code where information in the exact same information theoretic sense as in computer science of what's happening in a computer is stored in a physical substrate and retrieved. When it comes to designing the data centers of the future, the entire field of molecular information storage, where you're storing data in DNA as the most information dense way to store digital information, could be incredibly important as we continually create more data. Neural networks themselves are a biologically inspired algorithm. So our core ideas in computer science are coming from biology. And then those algorithms are being used to better understand biology, which is a really interesting flywheel. So I think that part of why so many of the most important AI advances in the natural sciences are coming in biology is that you're literally studying a digital substrate.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here in this conversation, but I really appreciate the analogy of math being the language of Newtonian physics. But we know that Newtonian physics is a bit inaccurate because there's general relativity. So there's a relationship I see, because when we think about biology, it isn't static, it's dynamic, it's ever changing, it's constantly moving. And in general relativity, there's the quantum world. And I'm trying to bring an analogy to quantum computation. I know I don't want to get too deep, but that is something that's being worked on right now. I have friends at Microsoft that work on quantum computation. I know you like going deep because you're a scientist, you're a computational biologist. What can you glean from this? How can quantum computation help with understanding biology, predicting it, simulating it? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I'll frame it a little bit differently, where even across Newtonian mechanics and general relativity, those are still closed form equations that are highly predictive of systems. So we don't really understand quantum mechanics that well, but it's still a mathematical equation that's incredibly predictive to really small error rates in physical systems using purely math. That is not an equation that is learned from data, that is not using like numerical simulation. We understand each component of that equation, and that was written down by a human. The argument for why that won't work for biology is rooted in kind of an interesting mathematical idea that we can try and unpack a little bit, which is that there is this set of systems that are called complex adaptive systems. And there's an entire institute called the Santa Fe Institute in New Mexico that's dedicated to this set of systems, that's founded by these incredible physicists that realize there may be these parts of nature that can't be modeled the same way that traditional physics is modeled, because there are a couple components in here that are non-linear. What that means is that you can't write down a simple equation where y equals mx plus b. There is some set of factors that you add together in an additive way to fully predict the system. There are points where there are just disequilibrium and it's a non-linear system. Biology is definitely that. There are underlying aspects of circuits inside of cells that have a very non-linear way of working together. The beauty of machine learning is that when you look under the hood, there are literally components of a neural network that are nonlinear functions that are able to approximate them. So there's this beautiful framing of machine learning, and I know we're getting a little bit deep here, but it's basically a way of programming a computer to do a thing that you can't write down in code or in an equation. This is an idea of Programming 2.0 by Andrej Karpathy, where it's a way of approximating a really complicated mathematical function without being able to even describe that function yourself. So we don't need to understand human language and the relationship between Mozart and bunnies to have ChatGPT spit out a poem or a sonnet like Mozart about bunnies. And so that's this amazing aspect where you're capturing something really interesting in the underlying function without needing to fully describe it. And so I think that's a really, really important aspect of why AI matters so much in biology.
Hi, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Messaging Lab, the force multiplier for biotech. Your biotech company is making the world a better place. You know that, we know that. But does the world? There's a big reason why some biotech companies attract investors, sign up customers, and get attention. That reason is strategic communications. At Messaging Lab, we translate complex science and economics into compelling narratives. And we have done that for the most successful biotech companies across healthcare, agriculture, personal care and beauty, materials, and the list goes on. We're here to make sure your ideas not only get heard, but resonate with your audience. So if it's time to amplify your company's voice, visit messaginglab.com to explore how we can elevate your story and grow your business.
Elliot, you work as a writer, you're a researcher, and you're working as an investor as well. As you think about people who are entering the space or thinking about entering the space, or people who are in the space and not sure what to look at, what advice do you have for them to make an impact in biotech?
I think that learning the fundamentals takes you a really long way. So when I first got into this space, I did 2 bachelor's degrees, which seems a little bit excessive, where I did a bachelor's degree in biology and also in computer science, because I really wanted to have the baseline fundamentals and first principles, which then takes you a long way and gives you the ability to come up with interesting new ideas. So I really advocate trying to find those ideas that are these core nuggets that fit in your brain that will really take you far, no matter what problem you're working on or what lab you join, and having that core understanding of what you're doing to then let this left brain creativity start to kick in once you have your right brain scaffolds. Biology is a really complicated field. Computational biology is the intersection of 2 really complicated fields with a lot to learn. So getting that bearing early on, I think, is really helpful. So I'm a huge advocate of the fundamentals.
How do you identify promising biotech solutions? Are you going to university labs? Do you have a call for applications? Are you going to conferences? How do you discover these biotech entrepreneurs and companies? And how do you decide which companies to invest in?
So there are a couple different philosophies on both of these questions. There are sort of 2 camps of venture capitalists, where some people really deeply believe it is all about the founder. The entire goal of a venture capitalist is to find incredibly talented founders with the vision for how to change the world, to give them capital and support them, and to sort of get out of their way. And so if you think about it as a ratio of the importance of the founder, the market, the technology, it's like 80% focus on the founder. There are other investors who are a little bit more research-centric and focused on saying, I'm going to top down try and model the world around me and give myself a little bit of advantage in finding the pockets where those founders might be and making sure that I'm investing in certain markets that I really deeply understand. I probably sit at a cross product of those 2. I'd say that's also the case for Packy. So we're a 2-person investment team. We're both writers. We both spend a ton of our time writing and thinking. And I view that as building up in a prepared mind of understanding the sector, really researching ideas, having the background to challenge and really understand a founder's ideas, and also having a body of work that founders can engage with and be really excited about. So oftentimes I have young biotech scientists reaching out to me months or even a year before they ever decide to start a company, because they're learning about strategy ideas or arguing with my points about previous companies in my email inbox. And that's a ton of fun. The way that we ultimately operate is we put a ton of our ideas out into the world, but they're not necessarily deeply defined investment theses. They're our understanding of what's happened, what might come next, how interesting science connects to business models. And then we let that percolate to both proactively search for ideas through the writing process and say, oh, I wonder if there are companies doing this that I'm sort of curious about, and going down those rabbit holes. And then also letting those founders come to us through the ideas that we're collectively excited about. So it's sort of a blend between being more research centric, but also being very obsessed with waiting for the incredibly ambitious founders to find us or for us to find them, and making sure that we're ready when they do.
It seems like a big part of what you do is this Century of Biology newsletter, where you're communicating pretty tech-heavy, complex biotech concepts to not exactly a general public. I mean, you said it's founders, but as you approach that, what's your approach when you're getting ready to write a piece? You said it comes from looking at preprints, but give us a sense in terms of how do you find the rabbit holes you end up going down?
Yeah. As I said, it's very selfish. I like to write enthusiastically, which helps when you have total authority over what you write about. I'm always writing about the thing that I'm most excited to be writing about in a given week, which is an incredible editorial privilege. And it really ends up building on itself and connecting in different ways. I get to talk with tons of incredible academic scientists and founders of companies and observe patterns across the companies that I see and the previous essays that I write. And that all percolates into the ideas that bubble up and that I chase down. So it's really sort of a process of continually chasing and maybe writing a follow-up piece on a previous component, or realizing a business model that's shared across two of the companies that I've previously written about, and doing that recursively. I do think that it's a nice benefit as a writer to have some object level topics that you consistently cover that gives you the room to write the sort of more creative and idea level pieces, where I know that if I'm not feeling super inspired and I don't have an idea for a standalone essay on a new topic, I can always turn and learn something new about a preprint and write about that, or focus all of my attention at the object level on a private company. And then once you do that enough times, ideas bubble up and broader essays drop out of that.
I have a two-part question then. What are you interested in right now? Did you read a preprint recently? And can we get a little preview of what the next newsletter is going to be about? So that's the first question. And I'll wait for the second question.
Cool. So what I'm really excited about right now is more efficient ways to make things with biology. When I reflect on what some of the core themes of the Century of Biology are, it really anchors around that. So I wrote a previous essay called Atoms Are Local, which was a synthesis and summarization of some of Drew Andy's ideas around the fact that we're probably only scratching the surface of our ability to efficiently make things with biology. So I put that essay out into the world, and I spent a bunch of time talking to companies in the sector. I recently wrote a piece on the economics of fermentation, where I learned a ton from the Synonym crew, which I think has been on the podcast. So these ideas were sort of percolating. And right now I'm sort of curious about the question of, well, what might come beyond fermentation altogether, which I actually think is the core kernel of the atoms are local idea. I think that when you look at the world around us, as Drew would point out, leaves are not built in a centralized factory. They're not grown in a steel tank and then shipped to trees around the world and stapled onto trees. They just grow and show up. And that's the thing that's gotten me excited about studying biology in the first place. So I've been tracking down a bunch of adjacent ideas for the crazier and wilder side of ways to do biomanufacturing and bioproduction. And that's sort of an example of a thread of ideas and conversations and different topics that I've followed through for really a year and a half of obsessing over now. And I'm excited to share some of what I found in the next essay.
Nice. And we looked into the world of cell-free. My inner Alex Rose, a friend of ours, is telling me to ask you that question.
No, cell-free is amazing. So I think if you think of what we've done so far in making stuff with biology, it's mainly happened inside of engineered cells, inside of steel tanks. That has not changed since Genentech. Nobody gets fired as a process engineer for doing that. But there's this whole world of cell-free systems that are sort of below the level of the cell that are super interesting, and the world of molecular farming that's above the level of the cell in organisms that has a huge amount of promise in terms of making biomass and bioproducts way more efficiently. For cell-free, you mentioned, right, you have the ability to freeze dry these little packets of biomatter and send them around the world without a cold chain and boot up a bioproduction system locally at a small hospital or a lab out in the field and directly make things there with biology. And that gets a lot closer to the vision, right, of saying, well, a little bit of a living system, a little bit of water could actually make something using biology right where you are instead of inside of a steel tank in a centralized facility. And then going the other direction, well, we have all these trees and fields and crops around us. What if we sort of tap into that using the tools of genetic engineering? So yeah, I think there's a ton of different directions to push on much more efficiently partnering with biology for its capacity to abundantly produce the things that we need, both molecules, materials, products, you know.
Yeah, we've definitely talked about it here on the pod that there are a lot of fermentation, as beautiful as it is. There's a lot of things that can't be fermented. And it makes sense to have these other systems, whether it's cell-free or producing things in plants, because they can be much more efficient than using vats. I'm super excited to hear what direction you take that in, because it is also kind of an obsession here with us as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think once you start thinking about products outside of drugs, which we can get into the weeds that have a very strange margin profile. For a patent-protected drug before it goes generic, it doesn't matter how you make it. You're going to have absurdly high margins and profits. And so there's not really an incentive to explore some of the weirder ideas. Again, it's like, why go outside of what's working if you've got a product like that? But for, I think, the future that all of us here would want, hence the name of the pod in the first place, we want to really have this abundant relationship with biology, and that might require new ideas. I would say the one caveat here is to give fair credit to the fermenting crew out there. We're getting pretty good at fermenting stuff. That's actually potentially dropping exponentially in cost. There's a whole world of new reactor designs. In my ideal future, it's more of all of the above, right? So better, cheaper, faster, more distributed fermenting and reactors in combination with cell-free and molecular farming. When it comes to the scope of biotech, I'm much more of an and versus an or.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm with you.
So we talked about AI and biology, but since you're a writer, I have to ask, because we're writing here all the time, do you leverage any AI for writing? And it's okay if you do, because I will admit that I do sometimes, not to write the whole thing, just sometimes I need a little bit of inspiration, but just curious.
That's the question of the moment, both for writing and software engineering. There's this crazy release of an AI software engineer that can just crank, and it's this autonomous agent that writes code and is blowing every software engineer's mind. I totally feel that pressure as a writer. The Century of Bio is a totally organic product. Every word, I was doing the next token prediction to put that into the piece. I've never published anything I have driven. I love it as a research tool. So I use a huge range of products for researching, asking questions. I don't think it's a very good editor yet. I haven't quite found my groove with that. But as a research assistant, it's just been absolutely incredible. As a computational biologist, I would say it's made me 4 to 5 times more productive as a coder. But that begs the question, why am I not using it for writing? What do I think it's missing? Paul Graham, who's a prolific essayist in tech, in a sort of funny turn of phrase, which is, if you want to write a really good essay, first have ChatGPT write about your essay idea, and then read that and know the essay that you shouldn't write, right? Because that is literally the product of averages across the internet. And it's just sort of this thing that doesn't have a voice or a ton of novelty. I find that why I write is that the process of being the neural network that is doing next token prediction is the place where I find my ideas. I'm writing extremely selfishly. I'm writing about science and companies and ideas that are the thing that I'm obsessed with at any given moment. It's just this beautiful byproduct of working in this medium that I can then put on the internet and that people seem to like it. People have arguments or agreement with that piece and respond to me. I would write indefinitely if nobody read it. That's how I learn about the world. That's how I think. I probably write 3 times more than I publish, and I publish too much, or I spend a lot of time doing this. For me, it's really about the actual process of putting each word down after the other, where I often treat an essay as an experiment. I am starting with a question and hopefully ending with an interesting answer or something that I didn't know. And there's just not really a way to do that with a language model. One other potentially simplistic analogy that I would use is if there was a robot that was faster at running than you, you can't substitute that for your jogging. Writing is this form of mental exercise. So it's about actually being the one that is doing that work and thinking to come up with new ideas. To me, the byproduct of that, the item that I can share with others, is fairly secondary.
So what does the future of biotech look like in the next 5, 10 years or 30 years? What's got you excited?
I think that there are amazing tailwinds that we've talked about so far. I think that AI is here to stay. Our ability to produce things with biology is just at the earliest innings. And that's all remarkable. There are also sort of sector level tailwinds where just the way that pharma has evolved over time, there's a ton of capacity for resources and knowledge and process infrastructure that used to be isolated into the largest corporations that now any startup has access to as a service. And that's really remarkable. I think that there are also cultural tailwinds. And I give Tony Colessa a lot of credit for putting a phrase on this and a set of ideas around it. You all should speak to him if you haven't already. That there's this founder-led biotech movement. It's not just what we're doing with biology. It's not how we're doing it. It's also who's doing it. In a previously very title-driven sector that moves slowly and is a little bit more conservative, we're seeing for the first time this huge crop of young technical founders, people with and without PhDs, people coming from other sectors, and sort of breathing this life that was in the technology industry into the biotech industry. And so I think that will really change the scope of what is being built, who's doing it. I am massively excited about the next 5 to 10 years for that. You have to really think long and take ambitious moonshots when it comes to the 30-year vision. I really think that we should be changing our physical infrastructure. One thing that I like to point out is that we already have a bioeconomy, right? We've inherited a bioeconomy. If you think of millions of trees that we cut down, the decaying matter of the Earth's previous life forms that we pull out of the ground for energy, that's fossil fuel. For all of agriculture and animal farming that we use to make our food, the world already runs on biology. But I would like to see a future where it runs on biotechnology, where it's actually these ideas and these principles that are way more scalable, way more sustainable to really produce abundantly for every human on the planet.
Oh, this is very well said. We will be speaking to Tony tomorrow. So we'll be interviewing him. And I went to the founder-led summit. It was a virtual summit, and it was amazing. I mean, Tony held it. He was the MC for the whole thing. It was very well done. So a lot of people that have been on this pod, I'm sure a lot of people that you've met and interviewed, all the different sectors that you're looking into, a lot of them were represented by these founders who are working on solutions.
100%. I think it's the what, how, and who. It's all up for grabs in biotech, and there's so much to be done.
Totally. Was there anything that we should have covered that we didn't?
No, I like the AI component. I know we got into some of the weeds of writing.
I never get tired talking about writing. But
I know. We could do like a whole separate writing pod.
Yeah. Elliot, you're a writer. You come from writing. You said you were an English student. So what are some biotech books that you love?
Yeah, tons. I think Siddhartha Mukherjee is incredible. So The Emperor of All Maladies, this incredible history of cancer, deeply personal. The Gene by Siddhartha Mukherjee, The Song of the Cell, his new book, is just really inspiring. It's literary quality applied to this space, and it's really remarkable. For a great history of one of the most important companies in this industry, Genentech by Sally Smith Hughes is remarkable. For a really good read on what it looks like to make a drug, For Blood and Money by Nathan Vardy is it's a page turner about drug discovery, which is really fun. And then for the new biologists in the room that are looking to go a click deeper, I recommend to everybody Molecular Biology of the Cell.
Yeah.
Alberts. It's enormous. It's a textbook, so it's daunting, but it's actually beautifully written and will really get you far if you go through that cover to cover, you're in really good shape for coming up with some good ideas.
Yeah, it's interesting because for Christmas, my son gave me these mini books that are basically like an overview. And they gave me one on biochemistry, which is what I had studied, which is pretty great, actually. And there's one on molecular biology. I'd like to read it just to see how they do it. I don't know if it's a good enough introduction, but I did kind of love rereading biochemistry without having to get into one of the textbooks.
Yeah, for sure. It's remarkable how readable molecular biology of the cell is. I was occasionally dust it back off and go through it. And it just blows my mind how coherent those guys are in their descriptions. I have a lot to learn as a scientific writer from looking at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to read it. I have never read it. We'll have you back on, Elliot, for sure. We're going to promote the newsletter and refer some businesses to you, of course. But the conversation just started. So let's have you back on and continue the conversation then.
Awesome. Hope I didn't go too in the weeds on the math of why AI works for biology, but it's lots of fun questions. And thanks, guys.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. Well, Elliot, thank you so much for taking the time today. Have a great afternoon.
Hey, Karl, what'd you think of the episode?
I said at the beginning, I'm a huge fan of Elliot. I'm a huge fan of Not Boring. Elliot and Packy write these incredibly insightful, technology-based newsletters. I've fanboyed them for years before I met Elliot at last year's Synbiobeta. And the kind of writing that they do is what I love. It's super in-depth. They have these investment theses. Elliot even said it during the podcast that he's writing for himself. And to me, that is the best writing, is when you're writing really for yourself, audience of one. If you can write for yourself and you're happy with what you're writing, or if you have one person in mind, I think that's when you're really super successful in what you write. What did you think?
Yeah, it's funny because that's like the opposite of business development. You don't think of yourself, you think of your customer. It's like the opposite, where here it's like you're writing for yourself and hopefully people resonate with what you're writing versus business. But anyway, I love it. I mean, Elliot just so smart. I think the fact that he's writing a newsletter, Packy has a separate newsletter. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Packy has a separate newsletter. It's super advantageous for entrepreneurs that are looking for funding from Not Boring, because they're able to get inside the mind of both of these VCs to understand the way they think, because then a great thing to do is find where it's relevant to Elliot or Packy. What are they interested in? How do you position your company to get them excited? I think that's wonderful that they do that, because then they're giving people a little snapshot of what they're interested in. The big thing that we talked about, literally the $1 billion question, is what are the economics of fermentation? How does that play out in the real world? How does it play out in terms of our pocketbooks? How much do we need to spend in order to support this new economy based on precision fermentation? I love the fact that Elliot's writing about it, because he's coming at it from a variety of angles. Of course, the business side, he is a VC. Of course, the scientific side, being able to poke holes, because that's when you are able to find solutions. When you see something that's not working, why isn't it working? And how do you solve for it? Because that is how we can make the economics more favorable, is if we're all talking about it, we all use our mind share to come up with solutions. I'm really excited to see where he sees the economics working for fermentation.
Yeah. And the other thing that I thought was super interesting that he mentioned is this idea that the people building AI kind of have this goal of building this God-level intelligence, this sentient AI. That's kind of their philosophical take. And Elliot said that we don't really have that in biotech. And I think that that's something, this philosophy, this grow everything philosophy, maybe isn't well defined. And it should be, because biotech doesn't just have planetary implications, but our ability to manipulate biology is really going to be one of the things that allows us to move off planet. We're not going off planet without taking biology with us. We have to potentially modify our own biology. We need to be able to create places where humans can live and thrive. And so that idea of a philosophy behind biotech, I think that's really the reason why we do this podcast.
Yeah. You mentioned sentient AI. That's a whole nother world. I don't know how many people are gunning for it in terms of wanting that to happen. I don't know what that would mean for biology either. I think it's a huge undertaking, which I know people are working on. But again, that's being able to collect the right data, ensure the data is correct and clean. If you're giving it dumb data, the whole garbage in, garbage out thing. I mean, it's so interesting to see all these companies that are gunning on AI or gunning to make something that is leveraging machine learning, but how much data can you consume and where are you getting this data from? Is it correct? That's what my number one fear with a lot of these AI drug discovery platforms is they use like historical clinical data that it's often biased or incorrect. A lot of science, unfortunately, when it comes to peer review, is insufficient. So are we teaching this AI to be dumb as we used to be? How do we basically ensure that the information is correct? We use ChatGPT, we use all these different tools, and there's clearly incorrect information that gets spit out. If we say this God level intelligence and just trust it blindly, it might just cause more problems. So that's my, argument against just being very gung ho. I love technology. As you know, we love technology. We love talking about it. But was that cautiously optimistic? Always have to be cautiously optimistic.
Totally.
So, but yeah, it's exciting to be able to meet some of these amazing minds and being able to talk to them on the pod, meet them in person, and continue learning from them. So it's great times.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a pod.
Yes, absolutely. Stay tuned for our next episode where we'll be doing a deep dive of Synbiobeta and what we've learned and who we met and give you guys an inside scoop if you weren't there. And if you were there, it would be great to reminisce. I mean, they have a lot going on at that conference, so you can't capture everything, but hopefully what we've learned will be helpful to you as well. So have a great day and stay tuned.
See you later.